The Heinkel He-112 was a sleek, elliptical-winged aircraft developed in the mid to late 1930s. It could have been Germany's frontline fighter at the start of the Second World War, had it not lost out to the Messerschmitt Bf 109. However, it still has a rich history. It's also a somewhat confusing history, with numerous prototypes and subvariants being built, and it was exported to several countries. For this reason, I shall cover the general development of the aircraft first, and then go into its service history, as even some of the prototypes would eventually see combat, and mixing all of the relevant information together would get too confusing if I wanted to cover this from a purely chronological perspective. Along with this, quite a lot of research went into the production of this particular video, and that's why it's a bit longer than usual. Today's video is also very kindly sponsored by Blinkist, which is an app that I've personally used for just over a year. It's a great tool for broadening your knowledge in a short period of time, and I've learned a lot about productivity and time management using it. Blinkist takes the best selection of non-fiction books, pulls out all the key takeaways, and puts them into 15-minute text and audio explainers called Blinks. These small, easy-to-access chunks of information mean you can learn at home, or if you're often on the road like I am, you can download them and listen to them whilst you're out and about. When I first started this channel, I didn't quite appreciate how much research, audio, and editing work a 3-day video schedule would be, but it turned out to be a lot. Previous to this, I had used Blinkist mostly to learn about historical topics on my short drives around town, but one evening I decided to check out their section on productivity. Now, people who personally know me know that my time management skills suck. But after spending 15 minutes a day listening to or reading stuff like Atomic Habits, Get It Done, and Thinking Fast and Slow, I developed new habits to improve my workflow, and I went from a chaotic 12-hour workday to a more manageable 6-hour workday. So if you want to improve your own productivity, or if you want to learn about history without wading through a literal forest of exposition, then you're in luck, because Blinkist has a special offer. Simply click on the link in the video description, and you'll be able to start your 7-day free trial with Blinkist and get a 25% discount on your premium membership, so you can read and learn to your heart's content. Once again, thank you to Blinkist for sponsoring today's video, and now, back to the He-112. In October 1933, the recently appointed Reich Minister for Aviation, Hermann Göring, penned a letter to Germany's aviation manufacturers expressing the need for a lightning-fast courier aircraft, along with a veiled suggestion to replace the word courier with fighter when the rest of Europe wasn't looking. This letter was then reinforced in 1934, when the Reich Air Ministry quietly issued a specification for a single-seat fighter to replace the outdated Heinkel 51 and Arado 68 biplanes. This specification was issued to select manufacturers, including Heinkel, Focke-Wulf, and Arado. Willy Messerschmitt's design joined the competition later, and the development of that prototype will definitely be covered in its own video. In the meantime, all manufacturers would eventually be awarded a contract to produce 3 prototype aircraft each, and so the race was on. The RLM specification called for a single-seat, single-engine, all-metal monoplane that could achieve 400 km an hour at an altitude of 4,000 meters. The design work at Heinkel was created by the brothers Walter and Siegfried Günther. Design work had already begun in 1933, after the initial letter from Göring, and this was then updated to meet the new specification. The V1 prototype of their aircraft, now designated the Heinkel 112, was completed on the 1st of September 1935, less than 18 months after the initial contract was issued. The design was inspired by the Heinkel He-70, nicknamed the Blitz and recently covered on this channel, and it retained many of its design characteristics, notably the reverse gull wing. Like the previous design, it had a monocoque fuselage with an oval cross-section, and both the wings and the fuselage were built from light dural alloys. Its retractable undercarriage had a wide track, and combined with the open cockpit, it was expected to have good ground handling characteristics. It was designed to be powered by the Junkers Dumo 210 engine, but these were not available at the time of completion, and the V1 prototype was completed with a Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine instead. Soon after its completion, the initial test flights of the V1 prototype began. Heinkel's chief test pilot was generally satisfied with its handling, but it was observed that the overall airframe drag was considerably higher than expected. Concerns about its maneuverability compared to the competition were also raised, the large span and deep chord of the wings being considerably larger than any of the other competing prototypes, but nevertheless, the prototype's overall performance met and even exceeded the official specifications, and so it was sent on for further evaluation. After reviewing the results of the initial test flights, it was agreed that the large, thick-profile wing had to be changed. Therefore, near the end of its construction, the V2 prototype had its wing redesigned. The tips were clipped back, and the wing root was straightened. These changes technically put the wing loading above the thresholds of the specification, but only by 0.05 of a kilo, and this discrepancy was brushed aside in a flagrant breach of German accuracy. The V2 competed in tests against the new Bf 109 prototype submitted by Willy Messerschmitt. At this stage, the 109 was considered the outlier, with Heinkel being the clear favourite. Messerschmitt, who at the time worked for Bavarian Aircraft Works, or BFW for short, had given his fighter the slimmest fuselage possible, and this resulted in a narrow, cramped cockpit that offered minimal headroom. The steep attitude of the aircraft on the ground, combined with poor forward visibility, a hinged canopy that made it difficult to look over the side, and a narrow track landing gear, gave the 109 incredibly poor ground handling characteristics that would hardly endear it to the test pilots. However, things were slowly starting to go against Heinkel. In March 1936, the V2 prototype was severely damaged in an accident, and it was hurriedly sent back to their Rostock facility for repairs. These were done in record time, but fate was apparently in a bad mood, and the newly repaired prototype was destroyed in another accident the following month. This accident, though a serious setback, was not fatal, as Heinkel had already completed their third prototype in January. This aircraft incorporated the latest modifications made on the V2 prior to its pancaking accident, and additionally the radiator had been redesigned, the tail surfaces enlarged, and it had been given an enclosed cockpit. It was also the first prototype to feature breech fairings for the intended armament, which at the time would have been 3 fuselage-mounted 7.9mm MG-17 machine guns. In early 1937, the V3 was assigned to rocket motor experiments, and with 1930s rocket technology being about as volatile as a sleep-deprived honey badger, it wasn't a surprise when the experimental motor exploded and partially destroyed the plane. The repeated design changes, accidents, and the occasional unplanned explosion had somewhat of a negative effect on members of the RLM Commission. By the start of 1937, they were already considering the Bf 109 as the new favourite, and a document at one of their meetings, titled Bf 109 Priority Procurement, made a clear indication of their opinion. Despite this worrying development, the flight trials for Heinkel's prototypes continued at Rechlin. This was mostly due to a few influential members of the Commission who were personal supporters of Heinkel and his designs. As a result of their persistence, both BFW and Heinkel would receive production orders for 15 so-called Zero Series aircraft, and this led to the Heinkel 112A series. Heinkel had already begun construction of additional aircraft prior to starting the new A series, and so the first aircraft to be completed under a new contract would be the V4 prototype. This aircraft was equipped with the more powerful Jumo 210DA engine. This was fitted with a 2-stage supercharger and gave 690 horsepower at takeoff. Aside from reverting back to an open cockpit, the V4 was almost identical to the V3 before it had exploded, and it was reviewed favourably during its initial test flights. But before we take a closer look at the A-series in general, we'll explore the 112's role in the development of rocket-powered aircraft, as said role is not insignificant. By 1936, Dr. Werner von Braun's work on liquid-fueled rocket motors had reached the point where test aircraft were needed. Ernst Heinkel was a firm supporter of new ideas that promised advances in technology, and so he offered to donate a pair of older Heinkels as testbeds, these being an HE-72 and an HE-56. Eventually, as these experiments progressed and advanced, the need for a more advanced, high-speed aircraft emerged, and again Heinkel offered to donate. The first 112 to be used for rocket experiments was the 01 model of the new A series. The liquid oxygen tank was installed forward of the cockpit, and the methyl alcohol tank was installed behind the pilot's seat, with the rocket motor itself being mounted at the extreme rear of the fuselage. Unfortunately, during an early unmanned test, the rocket, which was started remotely, exploded on ignition and completely destroyed the aircraft. Undeterred, Heinkel donated another 112, this time the V3 prototype. Before the tests began, it had the tail enlarged and the fin and horizontal stabilizer were reinforced against the expected thrust of the rocket engine. This time, the static tests were successful, and after several of these were completed, the rocket-powered 112 was prepared for its first flight. Erich Varsitz, a former Rechlin test pilot, was assigned to this dangerous task. As a safety measure, the aircraft's Jumo engine was started first, and when it was running warm, the rocket motor was then ignited. Immediately, the aircraft exploded, with the Jumo engine being flung high into the air. But, miraculously, and against all odds, Varsitz was thrown clear of the blast and walked away with only minor injuries. Again, von Braun was undeterred, and when he made a request for a third aircraft, Heinkel sent the V8 prototype, which would incidentally be the last of the A series before things moved on to the B series, a topic we will look at shortly. To avoid a repeat of previous failures, a more cautious approach was taken with the rocket testing on the V8, with the first tests being conducted with half fuel loads, and then a test flight with the aircraft being flown under traditional engine power alone. After this, a second flight took place, with the V8 climbing to 2,600 feet under engine power. Varsitz then shut off the engine and ignited the rocket motor, probably not without some anxiety, but this time it worked, and after 30 seconds of burn time, the aircraft had accelerated to 460 km an hour. This marked the first time that an aircraft had been propelled in the air solely by the power of a liquid-fueled rocket motor. Following this, several other test flights were conducted with various fuel loads, all of which were done with Varsitz at the controls. Eventually, this progressed to takeoffs with the 112 under both piston and rocket power, and then finally, Varsitz conducted the first completely rocket-powered flight in August 1937, taking off and flying under rocket power before coming down for a safe landing. Tests were also conducted with rocket motors developed by Helmuth Walter, and indeed Varsitz came to prefer this over von Braun's designs on the grounds of safety. Walter's rockets used hydrogen peroxide and calcium permanganate as a catalyst. This resulted in a chemical reaction that produced thrust in the form of hot vapors rather than direct combustion. As a result of this, most of the 112's later rocket-powered flights would use Walter's engine. All of these rocket experiments would culminate in the development of the HE-176, an experimental rocket-powered fighter that first flew in 1939, again with Varsitz at the controls. However, little is known about this particular aircraft and the project surrounding it, as most of the documents regarding it were destroyed during the Second World War. Now, with the rocket experiments out of the way, we'll continue looking at the regular HE-112s. In July 1936, the V5 and V6 prototypes were completed, both being modified to meet the new A0 standards. Like the V4, the fifth prototype was also powered by the more advanced Jumo 210DA, and had two fuselage-mounted machine guns. In the late spring of 1937, this prototype was presented to a delegation of the Imperial Japanese Navy, who would eventually go on to purchase the airframe. The V6 prototype was completed as a replacement for the wrecked V2 model, and it was intended as the pattern aircraft for the planned Zero series. It was powered by the Jumo 210C engine, and this power plant would go on to become the standard engine for the HE-112A and B series. It also featured a revised radiator housing that was more streamlined than previous models, and like the V4 and V5, it also had reduced tail surfaces to improve its handling. As concerns over the Bf-109's development began to take root, Heinkel needed to call greater attention to his fighter program, and so he offered the V6 prototype to the Ministry of Aviation as a testbed for the development of a new concept in aircraft armament, the cannon-armed fighter. This offer was finally accepted, and the V6 was modified to a specification that required it to carry an engine-mounted Rheinmetall Borsig 20mm cannon. The Ministry was anxious to evaluate this new weapon system, and so the modified V6 prototype was deployed to Spain, for use with the nationalist forces there, in December of 1936, but more on that particular plane later. The last A-series prototype, the V8, was completed for various test purposes. It was equipped with an improved version of the Daimler-Benz DB600AA, which gave 910 horsepower for takeoff. Initially designed to test the engine's cooling system, the aircraft was later modified to be powered by rocket propulsion, as mentioned before. It survived these tests, unlike the poor V3, and would be converted back to a traditional power plant before also being sent off to Spain for combat evaluation. The employment of the A-Series 112s in general was especially varied, as Heinkel was trying to get as much exposure for his aircraft as possible. The first aircraft built, the A-01, was meant to become the prototype HE-112C0, which was a proposed carrier aircraft for the envisioned, and ultimately fantastical, Kriegsmarine carrier fleet. As mentioned before, this plane came to a quick and spectacular end, courtesy of an exploding rocket motor. The A-02 was sent to Rechlin in June 1936 to take part in formal evaluation flights for the series, and so it avoided the fate of exploding or crashing, much to the pilot's relief. The A-03 was used as a demonstration aircraft at exhibitions in Switzerland and Milan, before it too was dragged off for rocket experiments. And the A-04 was retained by Heinkel for further development evaluations. The production of the A-Series was curtailed when Heinkel began hearing rumours that the Ministry of Aviation was heavily favouring the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Though it was a worrying development, he remained confident and determined to continue development of the HE-112. At the same time, he realised that substantial changes were needed to improve his chances and keep the aircraft competitive. Thus, the remaining pre-production models that were still under construction were completed, but then work switched to a new, more advanced version of the 112. This new series of the HE-112 featured so many changes that it should deserve its own designation, but Heinkel was insistent on keeping it under the existing title. The first of the B-series was not the most radical, but it still had some notable changes. It featured a completely redesigned fuselage and tail, a modified engine cowling, air intakes, and a new enclosed cockpit. The first airframe was known as the HE-112 V7, and it was rolled out in October 1936, with test flights running through till April of 1937. The first airframe that represented the transition to an almost full redesign was the V9. In essence, it was a completely new aircraft. New wing, new fuselage, new tail. There was barely anything left of the old A-series to be found. Unlike the previous models, which could be described as a bit bumpy looking, this was a sleek looking fighter. Much attention had been paid to streamlining, with both the fuselage and wings being covered in stressed skin and flush riveted. The old fixed radiator bath was replaced by a semi-retractable unit, which was mounted under the fuselage, and a smaller but more efficient elliptical wing was adopted. The V9 was powered by the Junkers Jumo 210EA, which gave a maximum output of 680 horsepower at takeoff, and this drove a 3-blade variable pitch propeller. This allowed for a top speed of 485 km an hour at 4,000 meters, which was in fact faster than the Bf-109 B2 series. The V9 also had superior armament, coming with a pair of fuselage-mounted 7.9mm machine guns and 2 wing-mounted 20mm cannons. Unfortunately, despite the massive improvements, the decision had already been made that would seal its fate. In fact, this decision had been made by mid-1936, not by the Reich Air Ministry, but within the inner circles of Hitler's government. Pressed by time to achieve their political goals, they had favoured the design by Willy Messerschmitt. The unhappy task of breaking the news to Heinkel fell to Ernst Udet, a personal friend of Heinkel who had recently been appointed chief of the Luftwaffe's technical office. To say Heinkel was disappointed would be an understatement. He argued that the redesigned HE-112 was superior to the Bf-109B in several ways. It was 40 km an hour faster, it was more manoeuvrable, it had a better climb rate, it was sturdier, had better armament, and it wasn't a nightmare to handle on the ground. All of this was more or less true. However, Udet, whilst admitting that the Heinkel was better in some respects than the Messerschmitt, saw little point in occupying valuable production capacity with the construction of two fighters designed for the same role. He also countered with the point that Luftwaffe pilots had found the 109's shortcomings an acceptable price to pay for its performance, and that with its elliptical wings, the HE-112 was difficult and expensive to manufacture, whereas the 109 had been designed from the outset for rapid production. At the end of their meeting, he attempted to mollify the bitterly disappointed Heinkel by suggesting that exports of his fighter were welcome, and permission would be granted for any number of export licenses if he could find customers. Desperate to try and salvage anything from this disaster, and to try and prove his fighter was still superior, Heinkel took Udet at his word, and subsequently he initiated an extensive international sales campaign, one that would see the HE-112 serve in a variety of places. It didn't take long for the first customers to come knocking, and although prototypes were flying over the skies of Spain, the first export customer for the HE-112 would be Japan. Upon viewing the V9 prototype during its demonstration flights, the Japanese delegation placed an order for 30 HE-112Bs. They needed a fast interceptor, capable of combating the new Soviet aircraft encountered over the skies of China, particularly the bombers, and this well-armed machine would be well suited to the task. The first four models left Germany for Japan in December of 1937, and during the next year all 30 aircraft would be delivered. On the heels of the Japanese delegation came the Austrians. They placed an even larger order, totaling 42 units, in November 1937. However, in 1938, this order was reduced to 36 units, owing to a lack of money, and in the end these fighters would never even reach Austria, since the country was absorbed into the Third Reich following the Anschluss of March 1938. This left Heinkel in a bit of a bind, as the large production order of fighters was suddenly without either funding or indeed a customer. But then a new customer arrived in the form of Spain. Impressed by the excellent performance of the three prototypes that had been sent to them, the Spanish Air Force placed an initial order for 12 Heinkel 112s, with the order later rising to 18. Two of these were immediately available and were shipped to Spain on the spot, followed by the rest during the first half of 1939. At the same time as this was going on, the V9 prototype, along with two other HE-112Bs, went on a European sales tour. One of the first countries to get a look at the new plane was Finland. During the spring of 1938, a Finnish flying officer had been sent to Germany to get first-hand experience with the HE-112. And in May of that year, a production model of the aircraft was sent to an exhibition in Finland. The 112 was tested by several Finnish pilots, all of whom reviewed it favourably. However, the aircraft was eventually rejected as the Finnish Air Force had already placed an order for the Fokker D-21, and they couldn't spare the funds for a second purchase. Another sales disappointment was met with the Netherlands, who eventually went with the Koolhoven FK-58 and the Hawker Hurricane. And then in Switzerland, the HE-112 was passed over in favour of the Bf-109, much to Heinkel's frustration. However, after this, Heinkel's luck improved when Romania expressed interest in his aircraft. Surrounded by hostile countries, Romania was eager for any and all fighter aircraft it could get, and as a result an order was placed for 24 planes in April 1939. This would eventually grow to 30 aircraft, with all of them being delivered between June and October of that year. Orders were also placed with Hungary, who expressed interest in purchasing a license to build the 112 domestically. However, this was eventually declined, and the Hungarians eventually turned to Italy for their fighter needs instead. Although none of his efforts delivered the breakthrough success that Heinkel was hoping for, as the 112 never entered into large-scale production, the few fighters that were built enjoyed a very active, and sometimes very long, service life. With that in mind, we'll take a brief look at that now, starting with Japan. The V5 prototype of the 112 entered the inventory of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the autumn of 1937. Contrary to some sources, there appears to be no official record of HE-112s seeing operational use over the skies of China. However, they were assigned to the IJN's air arsenal for evaluation. These tests included comparison flights against all similar aircraft types currently fielded by the Navy. Compared with the Navy's current frontline fighter, the A5M2, the 112 proved to be 65 kilometers faster. The climb rate was almost identical, but the maneuverability of the Heinkel was inferior to the Mitsubishi. This was a decisive mark against Japan favouring the Heinkel for large-scale use, as Japanese air doctrine put an almost obsessive importance on maneuverability. They also did not really like the engine. The liquid-cooled 12-cylinder Jumo was considered inferior compared to the air-cooled radials on account of its complexity and reliability. And so, as a result of these tests, the final report concluded that the Heinkel was not the right choice for a frontline fighter, and the test body advised against placing further orders after the existing delivery of 30 aircraft was complete. The last of these arrived by the end of 1938. Some were assigned to various research institutes as a demonstration aircraft, representing the latest in German technology, while the remaining units were assigned to the military for use as trainers and teaching aids. In Spain, the HE-112 would see more active use. Along with Bf-109 prototypes, the 112 V6 was shipped to Spain in December of 1936. As mentioned earlier, this aircraft was equipped with a 20mm Rheinmetall Borsig cannon to test the effectiveness of such armament in fighter aircraft. The V6, together with the recently arrived Ju-87s and HS-123s, undertook ground attack missions against various Republican targets, such as armoured vehicles, lightly fortified positions, and artillery emplacements. Many pilots volunteered to fly the experimental fighter, but only a few were approved to do so. Those who were fortunate enough to be qualified unanimously praised the aircraft's performance, its handling, and its weapon. A notable example of this weapon's effectiveness happened on the 16th of March 1937. Oberlieutenant Wilhelm Balthasar was a new and relatively inexperienced flying officer. His flight time was mostly as an observing flying officer in the HE-45 biplane, and he was stuck at Almerax airfield after an emergency landing. While he was sitting in the commanding officer's office, a report came in about an approaching Republican armoured train, and fighters were immediately scrambled to attack it. Balthasar spotted the V6 sitting at the edge of the airfield, seemingly without a pilot, and he then managed to convince the airfield commandant that he was in fact an experienced Heinkel pilot, and asked for permission to fly the V6 on the strike mission against the train. Said permissions were granted, and after a silent moment of figuring out the new cockpit, Balthasar took off and quickly caught up with the slower fighters. They attacked the train when it was halted at a railway station, and on his third pass, Balthasar scored a direct hit with the 20mm cannon that detonated the ammunition car, setting off secondary explosions that destroyed the target and a good portion of the train station. On his return to base, Balthasar also engaged, and set fire to, a Republican tank, again courtesy of the 20mm cannon. He was given a warm welcome on his return, and, despite lying through his teeth about his experience, he was given command of an experimental combat unit consisting of 3 HE-45Cs and the V6 prototype. The V6 would see continued use through the first half of 1937. However, its luck ran out on the 19th of July, when it was written off in a crash landing after its engine had seized up. The pilot survived, but the fuselage had near enough broken in two on impact. In the spring of 1938, 2 other prototypes were sent to Spain for field tests. These were the V8 and the V9 prototypes, both part of the A-series pre-production models. The V8's operational career was brief. It performed a series of experimental flights, but it was then severely damaged during an emergency landing. Repairs took several months to complete, and after a few more experimental flights near the end of the year, it was sent back to Germany. The V9 performed well and had better luck, partly thanks to the radical design changes that separated it from previous models. Similar to its predecessors, it was assigned to the ground attack role, and this it did to admiration, earning high praise from Harro Harder, an experienced Luftwaffe pilot. Once its task was complete, the V9 was also sent back to Germany, where it was used as a demonstrator for Heinkel to attract foreign customers. Following the positive reports made by Spanish pilots who flew the prototype 112s, the nationalist government decided to purchase a number of production aircraft. Once the first batch of aircraft were assembled and tested in Germany, the training of Spanish pilots began. This began in Germany and was later completed in Spain with the arrival of the first 7 aircraft in January of 1939. By mid-year, the number of 112Bs in Spanish service had grown to 19. Occasionally, during the Civil War, the 112s would clash with the Soviet-supplied I-16s. They held a decided advantage over the earlier models. However, the I-16 Series 10, with a more powerful engine and heavier armament, would have been a tougher match, though there seems to be no official record of the two aircraft coming face-to-face. During the final periods of the Civil War, the Heinkels saw little in the way of air combat. This was partly due to the absence of Republican fighters in some theatres, and partly because, much to Ernst Heinkel's irritation, some Spanish squadrons were being re-equipped with the Bf 109B and the 109E. They did, however, see use in tactical reconnaissance and ground attack missions, and they were used in both of these roles during the Battle of Madrid. Shortly after the cessation of hostilities, the National Air Force underwent a thorough reorganization, and on the 13th of July, the HE-112s were sent to Spanish Morocco as part of a new mission to protect Spanish neutrality. With the Allied landings of Operation Torch in 1942, a tense period between Spain and the Allies began, with frequent violations of Spanish airspace. During this tense period, HE-112s encountered Allied planes, including RAF Spitfires stationed in Gibraltar, but no major combat occurred. There was one notable incident in March 1943, when a HE-112 intercepted and fired upon a formation of P-38 Lightnings. One of the US aircraft was forced down with damage, and the incident could have resulted in serious consequences had some very quick diplomacy not covered it up. In the last years of the Second World War, the Spanish Heinkels barely saw any use due to either lack of fuel, airframe fatigue, or excessively worn-out engines. The state of the engines got so bad that they often gave out in mid-air, resulting in numerous dead-stick landings, and by the end of 1947 there were almost no airworthy 112s remaining. They lingered on, however, with 1 or 2 airworthy models being on record until 1952, when their 14-year career finally reached its end. Hungary should have been the next main operator of the 112s, but politics intervened. Soon after the orders for Japan and Spain were complete, both Hungary and Romania approached Germany with requests for the 112. As Romania was ranked higher by German leadership due to its oil and grain resources, they received priority. Not long after this, the Hungarian government believed that their orders would be delayed indefinitely, and so they inquired about producing Heinkel's fighter under license instead. Whilst this negotiation was going on, 3 sample aircraft would be delivered over the course of 1939, all of which were versions of the HE-112B. All 3 were assigned to the Institute for Aeronautical Research, where they participated in comparison tests against various aircraft in Hungarian service. In August of 1939, the Commander-in-Chief of the Home Defense Air Force, following reports of the 112's performance, recommended it as the standard fighter for Hungary. However, negotiations with Germany on a production license had reached a dead end by the end of September, and with the war against Poland now underway, the RLM forbade the export of any sample aircraft or any engines, and that put paid to that particular line of inquiry. As a result of this, a domestic fighter project, based largely on the He-112, was initiated. This project would eventually lead to the development of the WM-23, also known as the Silver Arrow. Unfortunately, just before the order for production models was to be given, the only prototype was destroyed in a crash during a high-speed test flight, and with the exception of one or two illustrations, barely any of its history survived the war. Romanian-operated He-112s would see the most action. Germany made considerable efforts to attract Romania to its side, including the promise of future deliveries of the Bf-109 and the immediate shipment of 24 already available He-112s. This aircraft was no stranger to Romanian pilots, as they had extensively tested one of the prototypes in 1938, and the German offer was accepted, with the aircraft being delivered as the He-112E. Later on, the order for 24 aircraft was increased to 30, and immediately after their arrival, the Heinkels were painted with the Romanian red, yellow, blue roundels and hastily pressed into service, with the first aircraft becoming operational on the 14th of July 1939. Training flights lasted until the spring of 1940. In the meantime, comparison tests were conducted against the recently completed prototype of the locally built IAR-80. The results of these tests declared the IAR to be superior, owing to its more powerful engine and better load handling during high-speed aerobatics. However, the Heinkel was the easier aircraft to fly for the average pilot, and it was especially easy to handle during takeoff and landing. That being said, when the war with Russia began with Operation Barbarossa, the Heinkel's role as a fighter was severely restricted in favour of the newer IAR-80, and although its powerful armament of 2 cannons and 2 machine guns, combined with small bombs, was effective against ground targets, it was not wholly suited to the ground attack role. The lack of proper armour around the engine, cockpit and fuel tanks, combined with insufficient low-level attack training for the pilots, and the frequency of 3 combat missions per day, soon led to heavy losses. After the initial attack runs on the first Soviet airfields were complete at dawn, the enemy was soon on the alert, and numerous He-112s were lost after being engaged at low altitude by fighters scrambled to intercept them. Despite taking losses, the pilots of the He-112 maintained a good liking of the aircraft throughout the war, and a lot of this came down to its ease of use on the ground, often on airfields of questionable quality. An official report, penned in August of 1941, gave the Heinkel a more mixed review, of which I shall approximately quote here. The clumsy He-112E, powered by a Jumo 210 engine, proved to be unsuitable for aerial battles due to its low horizontal speed, insufficient climbing capacity, and lack of maneuverability compared to the modern aircraft encountered. Its diving speed, which could be reached very quickly, was, however, adequate. The possibility to carry 6 12-kilogram bombs was useful as well, being successfully employed in low-level attacks. If the fuel tanks and pilot's seat would have been protected by armour, the heavy human losses endured in such kind of missions could have been avoided. The armament fitted, consisting of a practical combination of cannons and heavy machine guns, was also sufficient, both numerically and concerning firepower. The ammunition used, however, proved to be totally inadequate. There occurred several occasions when tracer bullets fired by their own cannons and guns indicated to the pilot that the whole lot had hit the target, without causing its destruction. After a year of continuous service, 9 He-112s had been lost in combat, and of the 19 theoretically remaining, at least 8 were not airworthy and were sitting in repair depots. These units would be pressed into service once again following the 1944 coup d'etat, though few would survive to the end of the war. Those that did would end up in storage, with their final flights taking place in the summer of 1946, when they were flown to an old airfield to wait for their turn at the scrapyard. By the time it saw real, large-scale combat, the He-112 was beginning to show its age. However, in the earlier stages of the Second World War, during the fighting in the skies above Poland, France, and the English Channel, it could have flown without bringing disgrace. That being said, it is likely that it would have been held back by its own design. As Ernst Udet had himself said, the Bf-109 was easier to produce in numbers. And when it comes to waging war on an industrial scale, numbers play a big part in deciding the outcome. Other things, of course, came into play, like how much time, money, and faith you invest in radar, for example, but numbers still counted for a lot. And so concludes this video on the HE-112. As always, thank you so much for watching, and an even bigger thank you goes out, of course, to the patrons, with a special shout out to Deliardo, Kevin, Bane, and FB for their support as Wing Commander tier patrons. Thank you all so much, and I'll catch you all next time. Goodbye.